This is The Raid, exposing the dark world of America's deportation machine. I'm your host, John Carlos Frey. On the podcast today is Anat Shenker-Osorio. She's a prominent American political strategist, messaging consultant, and researcher specializing in communication strategies for progressive causes. She's best known for her work on the Race-Class Narrative Project and for founding ASO Communications, where she advises global campaigns. She has presented her work to such groups as the Congressional Progressive Caucus, the ACLU, Ford Foundation, and Open Society Foundations. Her commentary frequently appears in such major outlets as the New York Times, Rolling Stone, and The Atlantic. Anat is on the podcast today to talk about the ongoing immigration raids and how to communicate an effective strategy for immigrant rights against what she calls is an authoritarian regime, and also share about her new growing coalition of immigrant right advocates called Brave of Us. Welcome to the podcast. So just tell me a little bit about some of your personal experience with this topic, and we'll work our way up to what's going on today.
Sure. Well, as far as personal experience, I'm an immigrant. I'm the child of immigrants. I am, as I like to joke, the original 90-Day Fiancé before it became a cool TV show. My husband managed to be able to be together on the basis of getting that kind of visa, and had to get married pretty precipitously 10 days after he arrived in the U.S. without a single word of English. So just the amount that immigrants and immigration is near and dear to my heart, I sort of can't overstate how important it is to me personally. And then as far as how that merges into the professional, I have worked in and around immigrant rights, message testing, creating campaigns since 2012. And that includes both work here in the U.S., but also many places abroad. And I think most importantly, in Australia. We lived in Australia in 2015 to do research specifically on how to change the conversation about people seeking asylum. The government had really draconian policy in place since 2001 at that point. So it was a 15-year policy of shunting people who came mostly by boat to offshore prisons that were operated by third-party countries. And
Wow.
We did a giant message testing project. And in 2016, the immigrant rights groups, the human rights groups, won 4 sequential campaigns, shifted public opinion 20 points, and managed to liberate nearly everyone from the camps and close most of them.
Wow. Please spread your fairy dust here for that same reason.
Trying.
I mean, my goodness.
I'm trying.
Let me go back a little bit in time. My reporting has specifically, or almost specifically, about immigration, and that has to do with law enforcement, politics, individual stories. So the whole sort of 3-dimensional look at what it looks like to be immigrant in the United States, in addition to how that particular subject is perceived. There's a big disparity between the two. So I want you to, if you can, to maybe reference why things haven't shifted. And I want to start there, because this idea of giving immigrants rights, giving them a piece of paper, letting them come out from the shadows, letting them normalize their status, legalize their status, has been a boogeyman in administration after administration. And I'm wondering if it's entrenched so much, or can it budge? I just want to maybe start there and then talk about what we're seeing today. I think what we're seeing today is as a result that immigrants have been demonized for so long that they're almost dehumanized. So I would love to hear from the expert.
Authoritarians have one song that they sing. It's true the world over, and that is essentially to foment a counter-revolution against a revolution that never occurred. It is to say...
So wait a minute. You just went way over my head. Can you repeat that? It's okay.
It's to foment a counter-revolution against a revolution that never actually occurred.
Got it. Okay.
So it is to say, would you like to know why your life sucks? Would you like to know why you have more month than check? Would you like to know why your kids can't get into school? Would you like to know why you can't have a pension or whatever? It's because of those people. And those people in the form of Australia were boat people who came seeking asylum. And under Brexit, they were North Africans and Southern Europeans. And in Orban's Hungary, they're Roma people or Syrian refugees. And in the United States, historically, they were Black people under the dog whistle we know as quote unquote welfare queen or the other dog whistle inner city crime. And that was a pretty reliable sort of other against which to kind of battle and cast yourself and to have someone to scapegoat and shame and blame until sort of post-Reagan era when immigrants came to occupy that role. Not entirely. I would say, you know, they're pretty decent at multitasking and they can have multiple scapegoats at once. But they have really hit upon this idea of the magical immigrant who is both taking your job and not working. How is that possible? I don't know. But yeah, so I completely agree with you that basically there's been from the right, but not just the right, a demonization of immigrants. And from the left, either silence, demonization light, or in that silence, a refusal to make the counter argument and thereby allow the vilification, the scapegoating, the othering, the division to just go unchecked and proliferate. So, yeah,
Is it, though? Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I just in that same mindset, is it a tactic? You started the statement by saying authority. So this is a known tactic. It's not that they necessarily feel this way or believe this way. They know they can garner votes or scare people into getting them to vote for themselves because they're going to become the knight in shining armor who will save you from the big bad immigrant. Is that the tactic?
It's both what you just said, and it has an even deeper purpose, which is to undermine the collective. It's to undermine the idea that we could have, for example, broad-based labor protections or universal health care or free public education through university. And the idea is that we can't have these things because there isn't an us. There's a them that doesn't come in the right way, of them that just refuses to work, of them that doesn't teach their children the right things, of them that doesn't believe in our way of life. And different groups of people have occupied that them role. You know, it's frequently, for example, Muslims. It's frequently, for example, African Americans. And now it is very, very frequently and for a while has been immigrants. But it wasn't always, as I'm sure you know, Ronald Reagan not only famously granted amnesty and spoke very, very highly of immigrants, he actually had the temerity to name the program in Spanish and to proudly pass braceros, and nobody, looked askance at that. So as far as the other question that you asked earlier, is it entrenched? Like, could it go away? Of course it can change. Like, it has changed already within at least my lifetime and flipped back and forth. And in fact, what we see in the data right now is that we're in what we call a persuasion window where we have the opportunity and I would say obligation to change it.
Fascinating and so relevant to what we're seeing today. And I understand this window that you're describing, but just a little bit more in the past. It seems insidious to me that a group of men, primarily men, I'm going to say politicians, powerful men, are going to sit around a conference table and devise a strategy to other a group of people so that the majority can't have social benefits and at the same time make us look like the hero and marginalize a group. I mean, this sounds almost like an evil script to me.
Yeah. I mean, it's literally, Heather McGhee wrote in the book Some of Us about the practice in kind of pre-civil rights South of communities where rather than integrate their swimming pool, they decided to get rid of swimming pools Because rather than have to, literally share the water across races, the community preferred to have nothing at all. And we see time and time and time again that when it comes to questions like universal health care, people are for it as long as it only benefits the people that they consider to be the in-group, and that they're willing, not consciously, but in point of fact, in practical terms, to sacrifice their own health and well-being and their ability to go see a doctor and not get sick worrying about the bill just to be able to keep people out of it. And that is a deliberately conditioned response that, right-wing politicians rely upon. It's the way they get away with people not noticing that they're actually the problem. The way that I frequently phrase it when we're talking in sort of campaigning terms is, if you want to know who took all your money, it's the people with all the money. And if they can talk you into believing that anyone else is to blame, if they can get you to point your finger in the wrong direction, they can pick your pocket with the other hand.
So what do you say to somebody who's going to criticize what you're saying now? It's not me, obviously, but they're going to call you someone with Trump derangement syndrome, that you're pointing the finger at the wrong person, that, I will show you where immigrants have raped and pillaged and taken advantage, and there's a real crime wave and we're getting rid of the worst of the worst. I mean, there's that whole other narrative that points their finger at you.
Yeah. So what I would say to that is first to go meta, and then I will tell you literally what I will say. All messages are only as good as the task we need them to perform. So before asking, what are you going to say? You have to lay out, what are you trying to get done? And what I'm trying to get done, because it's the only, I would argue, viable theory of change, is I'm trying to engage my base. So I'm trying to get the group of people who do agree with me, who are not xenophobic and hateful and, understand that immigrants contribute to our culture and community. We're all the better for having them here. I'm trying to turn those people from passive agreeers into my choir, into people who will repeat, in the same way that the right has created a choir that not only repeats their messaging, but literally will wear their messaging on those odious red MAGA hats, thereby creating what we call in psychology social proof, a sort of sense that this is what people like me believe. So the job I'm trying to get done is I'm trying to get my base from agreement to repetition. And then I'm trying to convert the conflicted. The conflicted are the set of people who believe both things. And this, by the way, is around 60% of people. They are the people who, in the exact same survey, will say, I support a pathway to citizenship and I support mass deportation. They are the people who will say, yes, I agree immigrants contribute, and yes, I agree we need to get rid of immigrants. So I call those people conflicted and not middle of the road because they're capable of believing both things. And it's the job of the message and the base, the choir, to keep repeating what is actually true so those people are toggled in to the correct understanding of what's going on. Then there's a third group of people, and that is not all the Republicans by any means, but there's a third group of people who make up the core of the MAGA base. It's around 30% of voters who will never be moved. Right. So I promise I am going to answer your question. The reason I'm doing this preamble...
I'm hearing you get there, yeah.
Yeah. So in your preamble, you were saying, what do you say to the person that's like, immigrants are evil, they're criminals, we're deporting the worst of the worst? Mostly, you shouldn't be talking to that person. There's
Gotcha.
No theory of change. You will not convert that person. Maybe at the margin, one or two of them, et cetera. It depends on whether you're having one-on-one conversations. You can do it over time. But that's not bang for the buck. That's a very, that's not a strategic way to approach this. What you need to do is move the greatest number of people that you can into agreement and into action. The way that people's minds are changed about any topic, and we literally see this unfolding before us, is by observing what other people do. people believe the thing they think people like them believe. And so when they see Minnesotans, for example, standing with and for their neighbors, they think that we should be standing with and for our neighbors. So as far as what I would say, here's what I would say. I would say, look, the same is true today as it's kind of always been true, that people move to make a better life for their families. It's really hard to move. And to do it, it takes courage. Immigrant Americans move here for the promise of freedom and opportunity in this country. And we think moving is one of the best and hardest things a person can do. But today, we have this tiny sliver of people that are hell-bent on stealing our healthcare, on attacking our families, on invading our cities, on poisoning our air and water. And they're hoping that if they can get us pointing our finger in the wrong direction, we won't notice that they just passed off another boondoggle to the billionaires that bought them. I think Americans know better.
I love that. And it brings up 922 more questions. So I hope you have that kind of time. Here's one of them. To me, it feels like an anomaly, and it feels like outside the scope of what we've been discussing already. This sort of tactic, this planned out scapegoating is Stephen Miller, an Ashkenazi Jew from Santa Monica, who is hell-bent, I think, with a racial tinge, if it's not just a tinge, real hatred. And it feels like direct hatred and not really a tactic. Or is it hidden behind a tactic?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what's in Stephen Miller's heart. I suppose I am guessing like a lump of coal where a heart ought to be. I do think that there are people, and he's probably the apotheosis of it, who genuinely have white supremacist, white nationalist fantasies and do imagine for themselves that they want this to be a nation of purely white Christian people. And yes, I take your point that Stephen Miller was raised as a Jew. There are horrifying exceptions and horrifying, that two of the officers that killed Alex Preddy were Latino. Like, there are bad examples within every subgroup of things that people have no business believing and doing. So I do think there are people within this regime that very much they're true believers.
Is Stephen Miller in that group? The only reason I bring him up is not to try and figure out his psychology, but he's managing the messaging here. He is in charge. It's not Trump necessarily. He's directing what ICE and DHS is doing here, and that's provable. I mean, that's from the administration itself, that his tactics are so heavy-handed and hate-filled. How do you battle against that is the real question there, or do you? Or do you put it in that same category as you're just trying to engender the people who do agree with you or that you can capture?
Yeah. Let me talk about that. And so here is where, God forbid I be a polite guest. I only come in one flavor and it's candid. So one of the major issues that we have is that we have been unwittingly repeating the opposition's messaging. So
I see that in the press all the time. The media just repeats it. So they, regardless of whether it's left wing or right wing, it just gets regurgitated over and over again. I think the media is doing their bidding.
Yeah. So prime example is the phrase immigration enforcement. To call anything that is occurring right now immigration enforcement is inaccurate, and it is merely carrying water for MAGA. Immigration is a word that has a meaning. I know you know it, but I'll just say it out loud. Immigration is the movement of people into a country for purposes of residency. I don't know what immigration is happening in Minneapolis. I know that it's a border state because it borders Canada, but immigration, the movement of people into a country for purposes of residency, is almost nil right now for very obvious reasons. And so when DHS and ICE and these masked agents are coming into places and assaulting, abducting, attacking, kidnapping, none of that has anything to do with immigration enforcement. None of it. Those things need to be called as they are, which is abductions, assaults, attacks when you're talking about the individual cases. And in the aggregate, they're crimes against humanity. So the first thing is that we have to stop using this kind of default neutral language, or when we talk about immigration policy in order to criticize it. Trump's immigration policy has gone too far. Trump's immigration policy is hurting people. None of immigration policy is how many years does it take to adjust from a green card to a citizenship? How many visas are issued in a year? What kind of visas? What does it take to qualify for one? And reasonable people can disagree about immigration policy. Different countries have different policies. What's happening right now, as you know and I know, is that people are being attacked, assaulted, abducted, even murdered, and sent to concentration camps, and zero of that is immigration policy. So as far as what one does about, messaging back and fighting back against the Stephen Miller regime, and notice I keep saying regime and not administration, that's also a deliberate choice on my part. Administration is normalizing. It makes it sound like sort of any other Republican government, and it's simply not. So what we do is we actually name things for what they are, not the kind of generic label we're used to. And we show, not tell. So part of Stephen Miller's aim rhetorically, and this is something that MAGA always does, the way that they use narrative is they don't just do talking points or Truth Social posts or press releases or interviews. They create a full 360-degree surround sound. So the reason why they send the military and these mass militia into communities is in order to prove that these communities require them. So then there are videos of conflagrations and, explosions and things that look really chaotic and dangerous. And then those images and those sort of sounds are, quote unquote, proof, which of course they're not, of the fact that these are lawless, unruly communities. And so the way that we push back against that, besides using language that is accurate, as I said before, is also by ensuring that we're not just depicting harms and horrors, which is important, but also heroes. And so a big part of the strategy in Portland, in the Twin Cities, in Ohio, in Maine, in LA, San Diego, is actually to make sure that content that we have about people doing mutual aid, people doing rapid response, people blowing the ice whistle, people in Portland, as we know, wearing those giant inflatable costumes. All of that is actually a counter-narrative offensive to flip the frame away from evil, rabble-rousing protesters versus law enforcement to people of good conscience standing with and for each other versus evil regime. And those are things that organizers have managed to do, and we have to keep doing it.
Thank you for saying that. The reason for doing the podcast was not just to parrot whatever the regime was saying about immigrants, but to go underneath it all and to expose the dark world of this regime, of its ulterior motives, and not immigration policy, the human rights abuses, the violations of the Constitution. That's what the podcast is about. So the only reason I'm saying that is because media won't go there. Corporate media, mainstream media, even the ones that we all read and I consume as well, they are not allowed to go there. They're not allowed to call the Trump administration a Trump regime. They're not allowed to call out Stephen Miller as a racist. They have to sort of tone down their language. So most people, at least the majority of people who consume that kind of media, are receiving these watered down messages. Do you have a message to media outlets, or do you just go ahead and build your own coalition?
Yeah, it's an important and vital question. And of course, the existence of you is part of the answer, right? Like the build your own truth telling is obviously what you're part of and what you're doing, which I'm very grateful for. We have seen shifts, and I am not one to give credit to the mainstream media where it's not due. But for example, the use of the word regime, let's just take that, or the use of the word abduction instead of deportation. At the very outset, January 2025, I started telling folks already, we're doing constant message testing, qualitative, quantitative, looking not just at what do people approve or disapprove of, which has no theory of change, but rather what is the language that makes people understand what is occurring and actually want to step up and do something about it. Because the message isn't here to run for homecoming queen. It's here to activate people into resistance. At least that's my theory of change and the way that I look at things. So we do see, in mainstream outlets, at least, like, let's just take the New York Times as a kind of example standard, of using the language, at least in, maybe if not in straight reporting, but in opinion pieces, they do increasingly use the word regime. They do use abductions instead of deportations. There has been some shift, not enough. I'm plenty upset with it. So I think part of it is that we have to empower our messengers to say it such that at the very least, it has to get reported that, for example, Democrats in the congressional hearing referred to the abductions. Democrats in the congressional hearing talked about the mass killings. Because there is a way they will say it if they're saying someone said it, if that makes sense. So I
understand. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's part of it. And then the rest of it is it has to come from everyday people saying it over and over and over again. And a big part of messaging strategy, and what I'm about to say is kind of the most obvious thing that I ever say, and yet the thing people seem to have the hardest time internalizing in terms of their behavior, which is that a message that nobody hears cannot convince them. By definition, if people do not hear the message, it is not persuasive. And so what too many forces in our society are always looking to do is, what is this kind of anodyne, milquetoast, purportedly persuasive thing that I can say that's kind of carefully calibrated to not offend anyone? The issue with that is no one's going to hear that. So who cares what it says? It doesn't matter. It's as good as silence. And instead, what we find is that if you want to break a signal through the noise, you actually have to be out in the world doing things. And I'm sure you know this very well, but a perfect example, when Senator Van Hollen was poised to go to El Salvador because Abrego Garcia was taken there to CCOT, as I'm sure you recall, he was told, don't do this. Immigration isn't popular. We lost because of immigrant rights, blah, 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 blah. And his trip to CCOT, which I don't think was done for this purpose, this was just an ancillary benefit, had the effect of making an entire news cycle be about Kilmar and be about CCOT and be about what was going on. And the same thing is true with the Portland Frogs. How do you actually confront this narrative that they're law enforcement and we're kombucha drinking Antifa protesters, other than have a thing that people are going to notice? You have to do things that people will notice.
Yeah, I'm not a big kombucha fan, but
neither am I.
That's beside the point. Okay, it's such a great and provocative conversation, and thank you for having this with me, because it answers a lot of what I'm considering to be riddles and pitfalls and detours of how to get the right kind of messaging out. Most people are afraid to step out of that box that you're suggesting. Most people want to conform. Most people don't want to rock the boat or be labeled as a leftist or an activist or a conspiracy theorist. Those are kinds of the ways that we're all portrayed. But I agree with you. If you don't message correctly, then it's not going to be heard or it's not going to be acted on. So that's sort of a little bit of background to what I want to ask you, which may be a little bit off of a fact-based approach here. Where do you access your truth? Does it come from your moral fiber? Does it come from your spiritual connection? Does it come from the history of a civil rights movement where people have progressed, where people have relieved themselves of an oppressor? how do you know fact from fiction, truth from falsity? I think you have to have some kind of a foundation in who you are and trust who you are.
Yeah, I think. I mean, are you asking like how do I personally as an individual?
Well, I want to be able to distinguish. I, as the general public, want to be able to distinguish whether I'm hearing bullshit or whether I'm hearing truth, or whether the regime, the administration is telling me what's real or you're telling me what's real. I get confused. What media do I consume? How do I know? I think it kind of hits me in the gut. This can't be right if I see somebody's windshield being broken, them being tased and pulled out of a car without probable cause and being arrested. I can feel that that's wrong.
Yeah.
And I want to go and declare that that's wrong. So I'm asking you, how do you distinguish between that? Because Trump will say, well, that person is the worst of the worst and they needed to be hauled out of their car.
Yeah.
Do you understand what I'm asking?
Yeah, I do understand what you're asking. So let me answer by sharing a story. I've worked in Minnesota for almost 10 years, since 2017. Minnesota, to me, was always going to be ground zero for both the repression and the resistance. And when I said that to people last summer, they looked at me like I was nuts and that it was definitely going to be, California or New York, because we're coastal elites who don't know anything and are evil and, all the stories, right? And to me, I knew it was going to be Minnesota because while it is far from perfect, no place is perfect, and I'm not arguing that it is the place that is the kind of most succinct repudiation of the white nationalist narrative. It is a predominantly white state where people of color, and in particular a Somali American population, which is Black, Muslim, and immigrant. So what I like to call subjected to the turducken of hatred. You can kind of throw hate at them from three directions, very efficient in that way for the right wing in that state. They have tried, like I said, imperfectly, to not just talk the talk of multiracial democracy, but actually walk the walk. And they have managed as a heartland Midwestern state, so not coastal elite, to create a government that truly passed progressive legislation with a 1-vote majority as their trifecta. And so, of course, Minnesota has to be brought down. And I promise I'm answering your question. Right after Renee Good was murdered, I had a series of conversations with organizing leaders on the same day, independently, one by one. And what was uncanny about these conversations, I'm going to share 2 stories, was that in each of them, people said the same thing to me, which was dumbfounded. No one is coming. They're literally firing shots on my suburban street. And no one is coming here to do anything about it. No one is coming. And so for them, the kind of known refrain, we're the ones we've been waiting for, that, we often say, that stopped being a refrain. It became their ethos. It became how they lived. And you didn't see people in the Twin Cities writing to Democrats or asking their member of Congress to please, pretty please, because they saw that help was not coming, that the only help was going to be them. And so their truth, to answer your question, became what they physically went and saw themselves out on the street. And in one of those interactions, there's a woman I was talking to, older woman, never been an activist in her life, sort of classic, central casting Minnesotan accent and everything, drives a Subaru, does stereotype upon stereotype, right? Just layer them all on there. And she was talking about one of her first rapid response, times volunteering of being out on patrol, person who'd never even been to a protest is now like with an ice whistle going out and like confronting mass militia. And in a quiet moment before there was, any kind of heat or violence, she said to this man, "What do you think you're doing here? Like, what do you think your purpose is?" And he said really earnestly, "I'm here to protect you. I'm here to stop the murders and the killings and the crime." And she said, "Sir, this is Minneapolis. The worst thing that happened on this street was some kid stole some other kid's bicycle. Look around. Like, where do you think that you are?" And he either truly believed or he was like good enough at the play acting that he's telling her, he's like, "I've been sent to Fallujah," or, like, "I've been sent to like a war zone." And she's like, "Sir, you're in the suburbs. There's a Jamba Juice on the corner. Like, I don't know where you think you are, but it's not where you're saying." And so, apropos your question, he's either performing or he's genuinely imbibed a story that he is there for some sort of like sacred critical mission. But the way that people get their truth is either by being inside of a cult-like reality in which whatever dear leader says is what is true. And that is why there is no utility to trying to persuade people that live inside of that. They truly inhabit a different reality in which whatever argument you attempt to present is just going to be waved off as a lie. And then there's the rest of us who either live inside of our known truth. Myself, for example, there's nothing you could ever say to me. I don't care. You could trap me in a room with Fox News playing on a loop. I will never hate immigrants. You could never convince me. I am unpersuadable. It will not happen. And there's a set of other things that I'm unpersuadable on. And then there's stuff at the margins that, sure, like I'm willing to entertain kind of policy ideas and differences, of course. And then there's most people who formulate their truth on the basis, like I said before, of their impressionistic sense of what people like them believe. And we see this over and over again. When the anti-segregation civil rights movement began, most people were opposed to it. They thought it was bad. It polled very badly until images of what Bull Connor and his ilk were actually doing to people started circulating and coming out, until buses of people from the North came down and started actually doing nonviolent direct action, as I've been describing, and then came back home and were like, "Actually, I need to tell you what's going on there." So the way that we spread the truth, like the actual literal truth, is person to person to person, because what people most believe is what the people in their own trusted networks tell them, not what they read in a paper or see on a TV or even hear in a podcast. You believe the thing that the people that you went to high school with, or the people that you work with, or the people that live on your block also believe.
I love that. I'm not going to suggest that your messaging is losing. But I do understand as a journalist, watching what I've watched and watching what I'm watching now and have for decades, that we're in a critical time in our democracy. There is a fascistic regime that is hell-bent on destroying the electoral system, taking power and money, and not wanting to give it back. That, to me, is all fact-based. Yeah. So it can seem like correct messaging or getting the word out or protesting or neighbor to neighbor in Minnesota and trying to become part of a rapid response network or blowing whistles. I'm not denigrating any of it. I'm just suggesting to me that it can appear like it's not enough against a regime that is armed to the teeth, that is financed to the teeth, that is coming after you and is not going to quit because they're in power now and they're not going to give it up. That's the David and Goliath scenario that I'm seeing. So how do you go forward there?
There's a pattern to what works to confront whether it's like a full-baked authoritarian regime or an authoritarian impulse within a more complex situation, as I would say, the Jim Crow South was. It's sort of authoritarianism inside of perhaps like a more complicated system. Same thing with, suppressing the rights of gay and lesbian folks to access medical treatment that they require to not die of this kind of new scourge, which was AIDS at the time. So what works in these contexts, and again, this is true outside of the United States, is sustained, increasing, nonviolent, direct resistance. It's getting in the way. It's being ungovernable. At a baseline, that's protesting. Protesting is important. It builds buy-in. It's like an easier on-ramp for people speaking out, having people post and say things to each other on social media. But what actually works, as we have seen, is when a critical measure of the population, and it's actually not a huge measure. I don't know if you've seen reference. There's, very widely cited work by Erica Chenoweth, who studies authoritarian regimes and sort of making a U-turn back into more democratic practice. And the pattern is that in places where 3.5% of the population, that's a 3, not a 33, are engaged in continuous nonviolent direct resistance, an authoritarian has never withstood that. So I know it feels like, because it is like, they're still coming at us, they're still destroying, they absolutely are. But the way that we confront this is by withdrawing consent, is by having, for example, members of the military refuse to go along with this, members of massive corporations. Why was it that after the January 6th attacks on our country, which is how I describe it, most Republicans, with very few exceptions, still chose to certify Joe Biden's win? It wasn't because they had a come to Jesus moment. It was because the Chamber of Commerce and other Fortune 500 corporations were like, that's enough. Like, we need you to stop with this nonsense. And so we need the different so-called pillars of our society to refuse to comply, to refuse to go along with this. And for the most part, they've been very compliant until now. And so the question is, what are our leverage points as civil society to make these various pillars, the religious community, the business community, the academic community, the legal community, the media, no longer continue to serve these lapdogs? And that's really the purpose of nonviolent direct action that has to keep going and has to escalate. That's my view.
With regard to what's happening today, one of the ways, or the reason that I came across your name, was because I understand that you're building coalition amongst immigrant defenders, immigrant rights groups, immigrant communities, the organization Brave of Us. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Because I know that when people listen to our podcast, the comments that I get the most is, what can I do? Yeah. So if there are places for people to plug in, that would be great.
We are never going to get out of this hellscape of authoritarianism, of xenophobia, of this evil regime and all of the things that it is doing to people, unless and until we actually make the proactive argument that immigrants are awesome. We stopped trying to make the proactive argument that immigrants are awesome. I don't even know when. Like, we decided we needed to be on the back foot here and we need to be apologetic and sort of eke out a but they do jobs, but they help our economy, but they're good for us in this GDP kind of way. F all that. Immigrants are awesome. And so what Brave of Us is a full-throated rallying cry that it's brave of us to move heaven and earth for our families. It's brave of us to make a way out of no way at all. It's brave of us to enter into a new space and learn an entirely new language, adopt a new culture, and figure out how the hell to care for our families. America is supposed to be the land of the free and the home of the brave, and that's a good thing, so let's make it that way. It's a valorization of immigrants as people who are uniquely sort of carrying out this idea and this dream of what it quote unquote means to be American. And instead of being apologetic, instead of accepting that we are going to have 3 stories about immigrants, that they're villains, that they're victims, or that they're valets, which is just my shorthand for doing jobs nobody wants because I like alliteration. We have to have a different story, a true story about what immigrants are. And so what Brave of Us is a narrative campaign. It's a messaging campaign. And it is also an organizing campaign. So the only way you get a message out in the world, as I've said, I like to call this the Bonnie Raitt strategy. Let's give them something to talk about, is by actually performing that narrative. So, for example, we are doing a Brave of Us, How to Ridicule a Ruler comedy show that will be headlined by former SNL comedian Sashira Zameda. Jane Fonda's going to come by, Jenny Yang, Zainab Johnson, Aparna Natrala. We have other comedians. So we're going to take the piss out of this guy because ridicule is essential to bringing down authoritarians, always has been, in LA on March 14th at Dynasty Typewriter. Please come to that show. You can also live stream it. Every dollar in proceeds is going to immigrant rights orgs. In Ohio, they're doing a Brave of Us tattoo contest, both temporary and real, to contest the fact of the way that tattoos have been used to vilify principally Venezuelan, but also other immigrants as purportedly gang symbols. It turns out that a lot of super right-wing people have a lot of tattoos, and they don't take kindly to being vilified for having tattoos. This is a way into a sort of culture we don't normally access. Obviously, a lot of left-wing people have tattoos, apolitical people. Tattoos cross political boundaries in ways that other cultural things don't necessarily. We are working on having an all-immigrant designer show at Fashion Week. Haitian Bridge Alliance wants to put that on. Basically, how do we show, not tell, that immigrants are awesome and we're all the better for having them here? Unless there is a countervailing thing people can actually see and participate in that is not just the defense, as essential as the defense is. And please don't mistake me. I think the defense is absolutely critical. But there has to be an affirmative story. Otherwise, we will always be on the back foot.
I love this. And we'll make sure to link to those if you provide us with the links to those events and to the website for Brave of Us as well. I wanted to sort of wrap up our conversation, or at least with one last topic. I keep hearing people want to leave America, or people are leaving in record numbers. People are scared about what they see. They're putting their heads in the sand. I can't tell you how many people I hear, I don't want to listen to the news anymore. It's always bad news. There seems to be people going to sleep more now, or people getting into a state of denial more than before. I know that people are also active. Is there a way to encourage people who may be too afraid to engage, or to come out from the shadows, or to not run away?
Fear is, of course, very real. And it would be a big old lie to tell people, but don't be afraid. There's nothing to be afraid of. That's absurd. There are very, very real things to be afraid of. So my answer is that there are many things that we find to say to people. One of them is bravery is not the absence of fear. Bravery is the unrelenting determination to act despite that fear. That's what it means to be brave. Brave people are scared. That's how you be brave is, if you're not afraid, you're basically just like a nutcase, right? Like you're just refusing to sort of follow what's going on. So part of it is just like acknowledging, yeah, things are really hard. Things are really challenging. Things are really serious. And the only way that we are going to get through this is by joining together, refusing to have anyone separate or divide us, and acting collectively against this regime. So that's one thing. Another thing that we find sometimes useful to say to people is the ultimate aim of every authoritarian is to erode people's will to resist. The thing that they want is for you to give up. The thing that they want is for you to stay home, or better yet, get the hell out of here. And so if you do that, you're working for them. You're helping them out. And then the other thing that we find useful to say, and this is one of the most interesting aspects of the activation research that we did, there's sort of a prevailing theory. I don't know if it's true, if people still hold this theory, but through 2025, there was kind of this prevailing idea that the way that we would get people into resistance was by talking about their kind of material conditions. That obviously the thing that is of highest concern to the greatest number of people is their own economic well-being. Understandably, we've monetized human existence. People need to be able to put food on the table. And so what we need to say to them is like, they're cutting Medicaid. They're going to come for your Social Security, like basically, and not try to center and focus on immigrant rights. This was a big part of what was undergirding, like, how do we get people to protest? How do we get people to do things? That immigrant rights wasn't going to be the thing because it's not universal enough, and it's not like my wallet or my dinner table or whatever. Turned out to be totally false. The things that were the most mobilizing, both in reality, in like actual world events, and in the data that we see in our surveys, was that when you try to activate people on the basis of improvements to their material conditions, it brings in this question of efficacy. So they're like, I don't think that's going to work. A big part of the reason why people don't do things is they're like, how the hell is that going to change anything? I don't think that's going to work. I don't think that's going to do anything. When instead you make a moral argument, and what that sounds like is, what do you want to tell your grandchildren that you did in this moment? When people in the future look and ask, how did Americans respond? What do you want that answer to be? Well, it's what you're doing right now. When you make the moral argument that this is just quite simply the only thing I could possibly do, that is actually much more activating than the practical argument, because it doesn't call into the frame, is it going to work or it's not going to work? If you're making the moral argument, work, not work, that's just like not a relevant part of the story. And then finally, the biggest thing, as I've been saying all along, is you have to do it yourself. People do the thing they think people like them do. And, I keep coming back to Minnesota. It's because I know it really well. At the risk of sounding flippant, doing volunteer hours, doing mutual aid, doing food drop-off, doing ice whistle blowing, doing monitoring has become like a FOMO kind of a thing. Literally everyone else is doing it, so you're doing it. Not because you're not scared. It's just like, of course, that's what I'm doing. Like the same way that, garbage day is Sunday. So I take out my trash and then I bring it back. That's what I do.
This has been an incredible conversation for me. And I know for the people who are listening, a lot of people that we have in our growing audience want to do the right thing and want to know what to do and how to talk and how to defend and how to combat and how to step forward. So this is going to be, I'm sure, one of their favorites. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Yeah. I can offer one more resource if you want. I will send you all the Brave of Us stuff. And then the other thing that I just deeply encourage people to do, and I'll send you the link, is there's an organization called States at the Core. They use the acronym STAC, S-T-A-C, but it's States at the Core. And what they offer is really well done, really comprehensive, vetted training in how to form your own rapid response network, like the nitty gritty of how do you sign up volunteers? How do you cut turf? How do you decide when to go, when not to go? How do you resolve conflicts when volunteers are like not seeing eye to eye? And then they answer really practical questions like, is there already a localized rapid response thing? I live in Akron, or I live in Poughkeepsie, or I live in wherever you live. So I would definitely also do that.
Great. We'll link to that in our website and into this episode of the podcast. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to The Raid, available wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about our guests and the subjects we cover, please visit our website at theraidpodcast.org.